Welcome in to another new podcast from the Coatings Pro interview series. As always, I'm your host, Ben Dubose. Today I'm joined by Yvonne Haley, founder and president of Haley Industrial Coatings and Linings. Yvonne, good afternoon. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. It's a beautiful day here in Southern California.
Yes,
So things are good.
absolutely. As it often is in SoCal, right?
Right, it is. It's a little hot out though, so we're
Yeah,
not doing any work outside today.
yeah.
But yeah, it is a beautiful day.
Well, I think a good place to start for any of our listeners that don't know you or your company by name recognition, you have been profiled in our magazine a couple of times, but for anyone unfamiliar with you or Haley Industrial, what are some of your career highlights and I suppose highlights for the company as well?
Thank you. Yes, well, my name is Yvonne Haley, and I was born in Puerto Rico, Santurce, Puerto Rico. And I got in this business about 41 years ago. I just graduated UCSB and was looking for a job. And I really hadn't heard about coatings before or anything like that. But my father was a contractor and my brother's a scientist. And so we always were doing stuff with chemistry. And I got a job with John Stevens with Stevens Protective Coatings. And I had to run his office and I learned how to type bids and what he did and all that. And it fascinated me. And during that time, I would take walks during my lunch, and I noticed I noticed a lot of things in the neighborhood. It was actually the city of Commerce, where a different area of Commerce, but where my company is today. And I noticed a lot of things, and what I found was like, some plants that were, chemical plants, and that, a lot of them were things got into the soil and stuff, and the people were affected.
Hmm.
So I got really into the makeup of coatings. I wanted, what is this? What causes that? So I started going to World of Concrete and taking a lot of classes, and that's over like 40 years ago. And I got involved with some of the organizations there I wanted to join, the ones back then. And I wanted to learn as much as I could, and I did. And so also at that time, I somehow got involved with the battery industry. It was GMB Battery in City of Industry. And, I used my chemical background and all the wonderful manufacturers that were out there then to help me solve a lot of their product problems, in their plants.
Hmm.
And the main one is to keep it from leaking into the soil, you know, and getting into like the groundwater. Because most of the people in neighborhoods and communities have gardens and grow fruit trees and stuff like that.
Right.
And so I really got really into it. And the more I got into it, the more I loved it. And so being single and being young, I could travel. So GMB, I say Exide because Exide bought GMB. But GMB took me to like Columbus, Georgia, Florence, Mississippi, New Orleans, Iowa, Mexico, a lot of places. And I took my crew. I took the crew. And so anyway, that's kind of how I got started in it. And of course you get known. People say, "Oh, you got a problem in the Middle East? Oh, there's this girl that comes around. She can help you." And so I go to World of Concrete. People say, "Somebody's looking for you." I said, "Why me?" And they go, "I don't know. He's from Lebanon or someplace."
Hmm.
And it was that same thing, like all that corrosion and different things that happen because of UV and the sun and the heat and the wind. And so the more they asked, the more I looked and the more I searched. And that's kind of like how I got going, really. And, had I had a family or something, I probably couldn't have given as much time as I did. But I did, and I started solving problems. And I was called the battery queen for a long time, or chemical queen, because you
Yeah.
know, I can only do some funny things. Like I remember doing a floor in Mississippi, but they didn't have enough downtime,
Hmm.
so I bought all this paraffin wax and I melted it in big giant things and poured it over my floor, right?
Yeah.
after the dried, because acid would eat the wax, but that would give the floor 5 days of cure time, because that's about how long it took, it took the acid to eat the wax. And so I did a lot of stuff like that, and then when, Xi bought G&B, they kind of inherited me. And so that's kind of how I got going. I mean, I did Pepsi and I Coca-Cola. I do a lot of pharmaceutical today and Disneyland and Universal. So today is different because, today I got a lot of companies that we do business with, but it all started a long time ago.
Let's talk about
And
sorry, go ahead.
I don't know, some phones are ringing here in my office. I'm trying to shut them off. But anyway, yeah.
Let's talk about your current company, Haley Industrial Coatings and Lining, where you guys have phones ringing off the hook. Apparently, it's nice that business is good. Your mission statement on your website, haleyindustrial.com, we're a proud woman-owned small business with large business capabilities. That is something that is certainly a minority in the coatings industry or corrosion control for that matter. There aren't a lot of woman-owned contractors. What was that process like for you as a woman in this industry, starting up your own company, founding it? And what are some of the challenges and I suppose opportunities as well, being in the clear minority when it comes to a business in our industry owned by a woman?
Well, it was difficult, really. I mean, technical businesses have always been kind of man run. My brother's a scientist. He founded something for MS and it still hasn't come out. But I mean, but he, being a man, it wasn't that hard to get. He went to Georgia and was at the disease control lab there for a long time working on it. But with me, a lot of it, I called him, of course, too, because he had labs. I go, what did you use in your lab, And
Right.
he would tell me, stuff like that. But basically, I had to try. Today, I think I said that to someone. What I had to do was I had to try it. When I got a job somewhere that was difficult, I remember the first job for G&B and City of Industry. It was a tank farm. It was brick. The acid had eaten all the grout out, and it's underneath the brick. What could I use there, right? And back then there was Wisconsin Protective Coatings, and so I called them up, and and I asked a lot of questions, and mainly it was like I had to do it, right? They gave me some stuff. I always had a good crew because I always treated people the way I like to be treated. So, I wasn't starving them and pocketing myself. I always shared. And so we went out and we took care of it, right? And I was in the hole $32,000. I'll never forget it. And I went in to the guy. I said, well, I have a little problem. And I said, and it was, he said, what is it? And I said, well, I'm short about 32,000 and I won't be making much on that. And he said to me, okay, I'm going to give you 50,000 more. And I said, you are? He said, well, you're 100,000 less or 150,000 less than the other company. So, I know it sounds weird, but I love him dearly. I did work for them for many years till they retired. But yeah, and I didn't make that mistake again. Sometimes, I really did my homework. I tried to do it. But in those kind of cases, so that's a lot of what I did. Like, when I learned about resins, like MMA, right? Methylmethacrylate. Like they said, okay, it dries in an hour for forklifts. It holds its color. It bonds to this. You can do this with it. Well, you know what I do? As I do it, I'd have companies like Rykov, and I'd say, well, it says it takes heat. It says it does this. What about if I do a job for you, and if it doesn't work, you don't pay me, but if it does work, you pay me and you give me more work? And they'd say yes, and it would work, So I invented MMA, fiberglass walls and ceilings. I invented all kinds of stuff with it because it worked, right? And so I think that's probably different because it's different today. Today, manufacturers say, oh, this, use this and do it this way, and that's that, I don't know if people do it, but I still do it that way, honestly. So I think when you don't know as much as others, or you're not part of the clique, you have to kind of learn yourself. So sometimes people are not that, kind or not that helpful, but then there's others that are wonderful. So that I would say for me as a woman, they look at you, sometimes like you don't know what you're talking about. But every time I go into a plant, there's a bunch of things, but when I go into a plant and I see it and it's 20 years later and the foundation is still good and it looks good and it worked. Nothing seeped into that soil and nothing seeped in anywhere. When I go to like Florence, Mississippi, and I look at all those schools and churches and the plant and everything's clean. It looks safe. Kids can play outside in the grass. I feel proud of what I've done, And now with the virus and everything, they go into our pharmaceutical plants and check the walls and test everything, and they always come out clean. That tells me another thing, right? So I guess I would say, and I got, I was interviewed by Tom Brocroft on Heartbeat of the City a couple of times, and he asked me how I got into it, and I said, well, my partner was killed in a car accident, so I was a single mom, and I needed a job, and that's how I got started. And then I typed these bids for somebody, and I learned what he did. So I learned the business by typing his work. And then I went, and then I thought, oh, I love this. I love, Mountain Dew, so I called the Mountain Dew plant, which was Pepsi, And I coffee, hot dogs. I like the bacon, so I called on them, and they've been my customer for, the whole time. They took an old plant over in Vernon, and I helped do all the floors and a lot of the walls and stuff. We made it really nice. So and functionable. Everything looks nice and functionable. I want it to function. But so in a way, that's kind of how I've always looked at it. And a lot of times, that going that way, it comes back around. So here I am. I should maybe retire, and maybe I should, and I do get a lot of time to do what I want. But those businesses that I took care of that changed names to somebody else came back around, but some people are there. And they go, remember the work you did for me, in the peanut butter and jelly plant and salsa plant and all that? Well, now I'm in charge of the dairy. Can you come help me here? So we really have been lucky. I go on LinkedIn or whatever that is, but I don't really put much stuff up. But we do a lot of really important companies, and one of the things was when the pandemic started, General Mills sent me a copy of a letter that they sent to Homeland Security, and what it said was Yvonne Haley and Haley Industrial Coatings employees and all should be allowed to work, to continue to work during this time, because what they do is critical to what's going on. And that makes me feel like, wow, and somebody saw what we're trying to do, because it is more than just money. It's really, it really is, So, I don't know. Like I said, we, Disneyland, they love us. We've been doing like Small World and all these different things, and we're working on Space Mountain. And then Universal has a new kind of land coming up, and we got that job. And they want us to do it probably because of Disney, And then, and then we have our plants like Griffles and Takeda and B. Braun and other life science, and select supplements. And I could go on and on.
Yep.
There's a lot of them. And it's still difficult sometimes. Like I go into, one of those companies I mentioned we went into because a guy from Baxter went to work there, and he brought us in, and it was really not a pharmaceutical plant by the normal standards. And I did the first pharmaceutical-like work there. And, it was hard because they liked this other guy, but he couldn't do that. And so they kept asking me to write the instructions down.
Mm.
We would like you to write down everything you do step by step. I said, I can't do that. I
Yeah,
can give you a bid, but that's the kind of thing too that happens sometimes, because it still is a man's world in this industry.
sure.
But I will say that women know a lot, and we have a good eye, because I remember, I did Dole Fresh Vegetables in Yuma, Arizona, fiberglass walls, and ceilings and floor, and and I remember a guy driving a forklift on my ceiling, and it didn't go through,
Oh, wow.
and because the fiberglass I was used to using was kind of like a boat fiberglass,
Mm.
and that's what I had used, and so that was like 40 years ago, 38 years ago,
Well,
a long time ago.
yeah. Technically, since you've been doing this for a few decades now, what are some of the ways that the materials and the products themselves have changed over the last 30, 40 years relative to when you started? What are some of the things, technically speaking, that can do today, be it with materials, the equipment, new regulations, whatever it may be? What are some of the things that you're doing now that you couldn't have imagined doing 30 or so years ago when you were first starting out in this?
Well, I think like a lot of the materials, we bought them raw and we did our own blending,
Mhm.
we made our own epoxies, and we had a better control of it that way. But it was a lot of hand laying down, trial men, a lot of, hand stuff. And today, um, they have screeds, they have different tools you can use, and the preparation as well. The preparation when I first started was like, I think they chipped up stuff and acid etch and soaked it. And today you might, still have to do some of that, but there's like diamond grinders and blasters and stuff like that, so you can get more done, more done quickly. They have blasters now that can do 15,000 square feet in an hour or so. So, and then as far as materials go, I think the material thing was up and down because, like they would say, you can't have phenol, right? No phenol in epoxies. So you go, oh my God, what does phenol do? Oh my God, that actually gives it its chemical resistance, its strength, and all that. So what are you going to do? It doesn't work then, right? And even helps in the curing process. So they say no phenol, right? So then people try to find something else to cover for the phenol, but it doesn't work as good. And somehow
Mhm.
they shift where they make it, and before you know it, it kind of has gotten back into materials, and it's come back around, And then, so that's been one of the things. They're like people have heard more about MEK and acetone, right? You can't have solvents in any products, right?
Mhm.
And so you look at all those products that cure by solvents, and you go, oh my God, you can't have anything. You can only have water-based,
Mhm.
and water-based can't take, any, like sulfuric acid or any of that stuff. So there's been a lot of change, but it seems to come back around. Like I noticed I made epoxies when I first started. John Stevens had learned, he had learned that, and I learned from him. And then, but the epoxies would turn green, right? They weren't color stable. And then, like to make them kind of look nice, you got to go black, right? Because otherwise the gray turned green and all of that. And then, I want to say Air Products, but there was another company before them that I really loved, and I can't think of them, but they started doing some things and changing some chemistry where the, epoxies would hold their color. But they always gave in chemical resistance, right?
Mhm.
So they always said, okay, for sulfuric acid and 98% and or that kind of thing, you have to use a Novalac, which never looked that good, right? Because it had a lot of volume of phenol and stuff. So you see a change in chemistry, then all of a sudden there's moisture problems, right? And mold and all that. And so along comes a new technology, cementitious urethanes, right? And cementitious urethanes, they can take high heat, they can take moisture from below and all of that, but they have cement in them. So guess what? They hairline crack. They
Yeah.
all hairline crack, okay? So, then you got to think, okay, so they came out with, people would put epoxy over them, but epoxy didn't have the heat for them. So whereas urethane and cement, some of them can take up to 300 degrees, the epoxy would take 120. So along came new technology. They got a roll-on. But there were some urethanes like roll-on urethanes that could take heat, and they would try to mix them and stuff, like top coat them. But the thing I've noticed the most that's so funny is that the urethane cements, in a way, are not as good as epoxy in a way, but better than epoxy in other ways. Turn green too. They have that color problem issue, but they're not color stable. So I laugh in a way because it's like things are repeating itself. Because nobody wants a green floor. I mean,
Right.
that color, and so they go into thinner versions, because it seems thinner versions of things can take heat better because there's less to burn, right? And stuff. So anyway, technology has changed and the laws have changed. I mean, like the EPA, they say 1 year you can use this and you can't use that, but then the next year you can use that and you can't use this. So you have to be technical if you want to be a good installer. I mean, they want to sell products to everybody, but not everybody can meet the challenge, to protect. Because that's the whole idea, is to protect our environment, to protect our investments, and that kind of thing.
Yep.
Companies that are making pharmaceuticals and making like Bebron makes like penicillin and those kind of things, and child drugs like for children, like penicillin for children, and that they want to be cleanable. They need to be clean, and they need to be, they need to not let like bacteria and mold and stuff like that grow. They have to be clean rooms, which is what we call them. So there's a lot of changing, but I'll tell you one thing, the biggest change I've found is that people are spending the money to do it right. People are wanting to do it right. And those companies like myself that do it right are doing very well right now.
I think that's a
Because
great
I'm not the
perspective.
only one. It's so true when you're doing it right. I don't know. I used to wonder, like when I first started doing a lot more pharmaceuticals and stuff, if there was a problem to do good work, because then you wouldn't have to do it over, right?
Yeah.
All the time. And I always thought, wow, people would say, well, once you get in there, that you're going to do it every year. And I'd say, but where are they going to grow to? Where are they growing? I mean, they got that much property. Are they going up? No, you're going to do your own work over. Well, why would I do my own work over? Because that's what they do. But what if it doesn't need done over? I couldn't. It was a whole other, mentality. And so, but it's mainly because it has to be perfect. So if it's damaged any which way, it has to be, that not totally done over. I know I'm doing work for a company where they wanted to go to a different company type resin, and I called a consultant and I said, why would you want to tear up something that's really good and working, no moisture problems, no failure, no blistering, and start all over? And of course they didn't. So we didn't, We just changed the color for the new company, the new company that took over. But coatings are really important today too, because, And now they're probably going to need it in outer space. I did a job for JPL where they worked on the space shuttle, a couple of times, because that's another thing in coatings. Things have to be grounded, like, in a lot of different plants where they make like gunpowder or things like, very technical, because when you walk into an area, you're carrying a lot of electricity, a lot of
Yep.
charge in your body, and you do that, you step in, you can burn up a whole thing. And JPL had been trying to get money to do work for a long, long time, and somehow when they were working on a space shuttle, they burned it up. They burned something up, and they
Yeah.
got a lot of money. They got a lot of money, and we were part of fixing that. And they got a lot of money to upgrade, and that's what you see too.
Yeah.
And a lot of industries,
Mhm.
that's the best way to get money, right? So I don't know. I feel like I've talked a lot, but I don't know if I've said anything much. But do you have any questions yourself?
Yeah. For our listeners, this is Yvonne Haley, president, founder for that matter, of Haley Industrial. This is part of our member profile series of podcast, and this has been really great content because the bottom line, you've been in the industry long enough and accomplished so many things that I don't want to limit the scope to just one particular topic or one particular job. I want to do as best a job as we can to go through your career and share some of the lessons that you've learned for other people who might be just starting out. And as part of our member profile series, I want to transition to talking a little bit more about uh, your role with associations in the industry, also with us here at Coatings Pro, where you've been featured a couple of times. We'll start with the associations. Your affiliations with SSPC and/or NACE. I know you've done some work with regards to standards and whatnot. What are some of the things that you've done helping the industry on that side?
Well, we were meeting and going over preparation, and what I had been part of before that they started that, the association was I belonged to another organization, and every year before World of Concrete, we got together,
Hmm.
and we would meet, and it was mainly installers and a few manufacturers. I think Dexatex would come, and
Yep.
maybe General Polymers, and we would talk about what the best preparation. And one of the things, like, we found, like, we tested, for instance, acid etching, right, with the right acid that you could rinse off properly and all that, and then like a scarifier, right? And
Yep.
we found that when you could come in with a scarifier and you're beating up the concrete and trying to create a profile and get rid of stuff, that what happened was you were loosening the cement itself from itself. And so you finish your job and you get it all in and the floor is beautiful. And later on, you see, like, pulling away, and you wonder, what's that? What's happening? And it pulls away, like, very slight, but when plants are washing with soaps and chemicals and all that, to clean their plants, all that seeping in there and getting underneath. And what we found that, that you had to do something to prepare that, to repair that type of preparation. So then we tried, okay, after we did it, we went back, and I think it was RP Coatings in Northern California, had their warehouse, and they were doing it. And I know I was doing it here. And then we said, okay, then let's bead blast it, right? So
Hmm.
then we bead blast the scarified floor to try to protect it from pulling away from the concrete. So that's one of the things we were trying to do, is to save, to eliminate failures, right? Because
Yep.
failures waste everybody time. And, it doesn't make you feel that good either, And so, so to give more, advice to, like, new people getting in the business, to, like, look out for these things. Like, I would tell people, like, the other thing was, like, moisture vapor. Do you go in and they didn't have all the equipment that they have today, right? And so people didn't know that much about it. And we took it for granted that if a guy poured concrete, he'd put something underneath that concrete against him and the soil and all that stuff. But we found later on, I mean, even in what do you call it, platforms, like second floor. Like, for instance, the first the IRS was the first places in Sacramento that found all kinds of moisture problems on the upper floors because it was a pan floor, and they allowed 30 days for cure. But what about on the bottom? You know, it never cured. So they had, oh my God, it was like all kinds of stuff going on with that and removing it. It was a big building and all that, you know, carpet and wood. And so the same thing that happens in resins, having problems bonding, other types of systems also. So what happened was, first it started with, okay, you grind the floor a little bit and you put down plastic and you duct tape. You go around for every 3,000 feet, you put in like maybe 12, right? And then every 1,000 feet after that. And if in the next day you see moisture, then you know you have a moisture problem and you have to do something about it. And then the what to do about it has changed too, because you know, there's been floor seal technology, there's been coaster, a lot of manufacturers, you know, and but what you find out later is, oh, what's important too is the rock and the mixture of cement, right?
Yes.
And so we found there's ASR comes along. That's where you have a big, you have a type of rock in the cement that expands with water. So you mix it with the water, you pour out the concrete. Before you know it, you get little like pop-outs, pop-out, pop-out, you know?
Yeah.
And of course, if you've got resin on there, you're going to get a pop out of the resin as well. And if you have wood or something like that, you're still going to get issues underneath it. Maybe a smell of mold, maybe someone's going to get sick. So what we did as an organization, well, all of us did all this stuff, right? And we belonged in our small group, and all of us belonged into the bigger group. And then we would meet and we would talk about that, you know? What did you find the best way to prepare this type of floor for this type of resin, or, you know, and that's what one of the main things that working with an organization. I mean, I used to love to go to World of Concrete because all the classes, people would bring films of like really corrosive areas, like just really, you think, wow, you know? And when I got into my battery plants and I tried all these ways to solve problems, I'd go see these films and I'd say, that's how I did it. Okay, I think I'm going to be okay. Somebody else is doing it too, you know? Or, you know, I mean, I think that is funny, but it feels like you're not alone in how you're doing stuff, right? And that's probably, being a woman, that was important as well. Because I remember doing a floor for Nestle, you know, in California. And I remember I always, I don't know why I did this, but I always tested for moisture, and I always put down test samples. And then with the MMA, where it dries really quickly, you can do a test really quickly. And then you have tools to take it up, the sample. You see if any concrete comes with it, if there's any moisture and all that. And so, you know, you start out like that. And then when you start sharing that knowledge with other people, before you know it, that's shared and shared and shared. And before you know it, someone writes a paper on it. Someone puts together I think now you can go online and say, okay, if you want to do let's say you want to do a pit, right? That it's going to hold sulfuric acid. You could probably get the instructions online, you know, or at least some guidance, you know, some guidance on how to do it.
For sure.
And I think that makes things better. I mean, because I think one of the things, and I'm not sure, but a lot of the coatings were always wonderful because they had a lot of things in them that were just incredible, right? But then as they when they started going, like, checking, they found that those things caused cancer,
Mm-hmm.
right? They
Mm-hmm.
caused some bad health issues. And
Correct.
so they had to pull them out. And I know they made panels like for freezers years and years ago, and they had asbestos. But man, they were strong. I mean, you know, they didn't cause a problem unless you disturbed them, right? Started drilling or started making a hole in them and stuff like that. So someone turned me on to that years ago, and I think it was in Riverside, but then it came up in City of Industry, and what I did was I encapsulated it with
Mm-hmm.
fiberglass. And so I didn't have to do any prep really or anything. The resins bonded, I tested the bonding, and we just encapsulated it. Because pulling all that stuff out and putting it in our dumps, all the rain, and we don't have much rain now, but we used to get a lot of rain, and rain, it would start moving, right? And it would contaminate more land and more places. So I know I did a huge job for Farmer John and one for another guy in the industry and Windsor Foods and in Riverside. I just encapsulated the asbestos. Now, of course, I had an issue at Neutrogena once, and it was, in the tile, right underneath the tile. It wasn't the tile; it was the glue, and of course, it had to be, done in a different way because you have to do it all. Special companies do that and remove
Yeah.
it and take it to the landfills in
Mm-hmm.
plastic. So, I mean, I think the organizations have really helped in bringing knowledge to people and what they want to, do with, in
Yeah.
coatings, whether they want to be, technical advisors or whatever. But I think it's really done a lot for us. I think they really offer a lot of knowledge, years of, I remember when I first started going to the thing before World of Concrete, my dad died young from his work in the Navy and chemical kind of disease. And I remember I met like Bob Beatty from Beatty Coatings. He
Mm-hmm.
reminded me of my dad, and he taught me so much about that kind of thing, because in places like Georgia and Mississippi and those, we were in parts of California, the mountains and stuff, people did a lot of stuff, right? And they got rid of a lot of stuff that caused a lot of damage. And this way, we can encapsulate that kind of stuff, right? So we save our environment.
Right.
And so that was what I always said, I could save your investment in your plant or your facility, and at the same time save our environment. That was one of the things that I really was part of my thought.
What do you think
So,
the potential benefits are when it comes to now combining SSPC and NACE, or sort of combining the protective coatings, the contractors, if you will, with the more traditional corrosion control audience? What do you think the potential benefits are from that? I know the merger is just in its second year now, but what do you see as some potential, areas of opportunity in the years ahead?
well, I mean, the the SSPC can actually educate the NACE.
Hmm.
NACE has all the corrosion. Sometimes it's just power poles, right? I remember taking a thing with them a number of years ago, and all those infrastructures are going bad now. They're wearing out, right? And to fix them back when was 3,000. To replace them is 300,000. So they're kind of like in between. Well, the SSPC people, the real knowledgeable people in what works in that kind of environment, could actually probably save them money, find them solutions, right? That can help them afford to do all that's needed, because there's a lot to be needed. And that whole idea of encapsulating, right, and giving them strength. I believe There's companies like Sourhorizon that makes some incredible resins for incredible situations, and I think they're involved with NACE and SSPC and also, other organizations. And I worked with them on a project where batteries were always being broken down in the parts, put in different piles to go where it had to go outside. And California said you can't do that anymore. And so there was a company, Quinetco, there in City of Industry. So they went to build a building, right? And they got a contractor, and he started doing all the pilings and doing the whole thing. And they found that the battery acid in the soil ate all those supports, right? So the option was, do we rip it all out and take all that down, what we've done, or would something work? Well, Sourhorizon has a solution. They make something that we went out and we dug around every one of them. There was like 72, I don't know, a lot of them. We got all the way around it, and we framed and poured their special concrete. And their concrete, the more battery acid that hits it, and it's a chemistry type thing. That's something it always needed sulfuric to trigger it to get working and get going. But now they make it with it. So you just add water, you will the cement. And we redid all those. And they came back and they tested the strength, they tested everything, and they were allowed to go on and build that building to enclose the battery production. So that's where not everybody's heard of Sourhorizon, right? So them coming forward, I heard about them a long time ago in Nabisco, where, because their products also take, there's a lot of processes that give off other things when you're, like if you're making crackers, right? There's some other things that when you're baking them at that heat and all that stuff, and what happens is that there's some byproducts that happen, and those byproducts are very corrosive, right? And so I remember doing my first big job with Sourhorizon at Nabisco, Lena Park, underneath the ovens. And I couldn't freaking believe it. And it had to be done in such a technical way. But I had guys that fit. And I loved it. That kind of stuff really, I loved it. I loved learning about it. It's like, for instance, let's talk about like a sewage pipe. Let's talk about a sewage pipe, right? A sewage pipe. In order to just dig that up and put a new one, there's a lot of bad stuff that's going to get loose there, right?
Yep.
And what they found was that another way was you dug a hole over the opening, and then there was a piece of equipment that was made by someone that works with Sourhorizon, and it puts in this large, what is it? It's like a large, a pump, a big pump, and with a large hose. And what happened was it would clean and neutralize what was in there, right? And then they could take the top of that part off and put something else, and then it would wrap itself around. And what they got was a brand new pipe without ripping it apart. So to me, that's where the two work together in a way, the SSPC and then the corrosion ones.
Yep.
I don't know if I made sense with that.
No, I think,
but that's how I see it.
yeah, that's a really interesting connection that makes sense for how it's mutually beneficial for both of those groups. I like to think, by the way, that's also mutually beneficial for the associations and us here at Coatings Pro, where we're now an official member magazine. And I want to segue to talking a little bit about that before we close up. Yvonne, I know you've been profiled and interviewed a couple of times in Coatings Pro in the past. I know you've also read a lot of articles on a frequent basis.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways that Coatings Pro has helped you over the years, and how does that potentially fit into the association world now?
Well, you end up with a problem to solve, right, for
Hmm.
a customer, and you don't know how to do it. And you go and you look through Coding Pro and you find something, you find it interesting. I'm going way back, it was like finding Wisconsin protective coatings in there, you know,
Yep.
and looking and finding out what they did and wanting to know more,
Hmm.
And then I remember having to buy the stuff and paying cash for it off of District in um, in Vernon for G&B and City of Industry, my first job. But then it's like a go-to, right? I hear kids go, "Oh, you can learn anything on YouTube today," and you probably could. But but if you want it to be good information, you go to some place like Coding Pro, right? And
Hmm.
you look up, are there any articles on dealing with I don't know, sewage plants or and you've had so many wonderful articles. What is best for a battery plant or a chemical plant? I mean, like making cough medicine. It sounds weird, but remember, I'm trying to protect the environment. And there was a plant in Vernon that made cough medicine that ate the floor all the way down to dirt.
Yeah.
And it was the glacial acid in the process, and it was the glacial acid. And it
Yep.
was through Coding Pro that I found someone that handles glacial acid. Because I
Mm.
remember GP says no epoxy handles it. Lonnie Sawyer said no epoxy handles it. This one said no epoxy handles it. But then I found someone that did have something that handled it, right? And
Yep.
I found it in the magazine. Then I called them up and I loved it. And then years later, I'm doing the job for Baxter. And upstairs in a small area, it was small, I saw glacial acid. I saw a drum. And I switched out materials and
How
I
about
put
that?
that one,
How about that?
you know. And so that, yeah. And then you know what? Years later, they asked Santiago, what was that product Yvonne put in there? It's still there. It still works. And that's what that's what's wonderful about a magazine like Coding Pro.
Well, we
It is,
appreciate
a
that.
lot of good professionals. Oh yeah, there's a lot of wonderful information in there, you know, materials and companies and stuff like that. You can also, you know, that's where the coding people used to have an organization as well.
Hmm.
Our own small ones, like NACE has that, right?
Hmm.
And I remember when I used to go to the NACE meetings at Stevens Steakhouse, I think it was, and there was a guy that was he was just a lot of an old timer, and he would say, Yvonne, how would you prep this to get a good bond? And
Yep.
I would laugh, you know, and I'd tell them how I would, and they'd say, wow, and that's it. I mean, working together, I think it makes it, uh, you know, it makes it more more true knowledge, right?
Mm. Yeah.
And because I mean, I heard someone say to me recently on a project, they said, "Well, look, I'll be gone by the time, whatever." And I'd say, "Yeah, but don't you want it to go on?"
That's
I
true.
think that's how I got into the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
Was that honestly, I mean, I could take it to the bank. I'm still there because
Oh,
my work is still there too.
good point. Haley,
And yeah.
we're on the phone now with Yvonne Haley, founder and president of Haley Industrial. Last question for you, Yvonne. Anyone new to the industry, be it someone new to your company or someone just entering the industry and maybe looking at, AMP and some of the association offerings and things they can do, what would you advise them as far as how to get started and potentially put themselves on a path to success like what you've enjoyed the last few decades?
Well, I would tell them to go to Worlds of Concrete this coming year, January, and go and sit and talk with the different groups like NACE and Coding Pro, and get to know that aspect of it as well. And as well as looking, at different manufacturers and different people selling stuff. But, always find out what, because like this, like in the battery industry, right? I know a lot of people there, and they told me, you know what, we're starting up now, the meeting. We'd like you to come, because I know a lot about battery plants. And I said, really? They said, oh, yeah, you've been there from the beginning. And so, I think they should get to know what organizations specialize in their interest and what can offer them good guidance,
Yeah.
So I think it's important. When I first started my company, there weren't any really, or maybe they were. I didn't know. But when I first started, I called on OSHA. I had OSHA come and see me. I called on OSHA, the DOT department, DOT. I called on everything I could think of that could help me, right, in what I needed to do my business, because I did have to handle flammables and all that. And then I thought, well, what is this magazine,
Yep.
right? And then I started, wow. Then I started ordering the magazine, and then I cut out pictures. I said, look, this is how we should do it. Look at how they're doing it. This is perfect. And I think, that's a wonderful way to do it. Be humble about it, because you
Yep.
want to be the best, and you can talk a lot, but, you do a good job, and that talks for itself. So I tell them to get involved,
Excellent
and
advice.
yeah, I think get involved. And so
And
that's what I would say.
for anyone who wants to ask more or learn more about your career and your company, I'm guessing the best way to do that is haleyindustrial.com.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's there might be like a Tom Brokaw, a part of my thing with the heartbeat of the city. The whole thing is really interesting, though, because he asked a lot of questions. He had never heard of anything
Yeah.
like this.
Yep.
Never heard of coding.
I actually just viewed it before our recording. I can confirm it was very, very interesting. And yep, that's on your website at haleyindustrial.com.
Yeah, it's a short version of it, but it's still,
Yep.
because most people don't know. I'll tell you, my granddaughter was going to a school, and someone bought the land at the bottom of the hill, and were making an underground parking, and the school started falling down. I mean, we couldn't see it. It was a little by little, but it started sinking, and I knew where to go. I called some of the best people in the industry that I know of that handle stuff like that. And they came out, and, and we talked to them about it and what needed to be done, and that's where that the organizations help
Yep.
too, You
Makes
find some
sense.
of the best in the best, right?
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
that's it. And I consider Haley to be one of the best too. And I think it's because I'm a woman owned, and because I had to self-teach myself, and because I loved it so much, and I met the most wonderful people.
Yep.
For every proof that I met somebody wonderful, and that's important.
Yep. Without a doubt.
And nobody would know, nobody would know all the stuff about me, because I don't really talk about it all the time, but and stuff. But I do know a lot, and it's and I think I made a difference.
Yes,
And
absolutely. You have.
so
Well,
okay,
Yvonne,
and you
thank
have
you
too.
yeah, well, we appreciate that. I think this is the longer version of your little profile interview that we were talking about. If you want the 3-minute version, you can check out the haleyindustrial.com video. And if you want the longer version, well, that's what we're here for. And Yvonne, thank you so much for the time today. One last round of plugs. For Haley Industrial Coatings and Linings, go to haleyindustrial.com. For us at Coatings Pro, coatingspromag.com. And for AMP, it's ampp.org. For Yvonne Haley, I'm Ben Dubose. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode from the Coatings Pro interview series.